Earlier this month, we attended the annual conference for the American Marketing Association St. Louis at Webster University. It was an amazingly well run conference with some great speakers. And today, I'm going to share some of the key takeaways from a presentation by Mike Allton from the AI Hat, as well as my thoughts. Now, I know how weary we all are talking about AI in 2026. In my conversations with many people, I hear three common attitudes expressed. The first is, I use AI every day, Sean, don't you? Chat, can you pull up 10 reasons why Sean ought to be using AI so I can email them to him? Sorry for the extra step, Sean. I'd have one of my agents do it, but it's busy on some other tasks. Number two, I think the technology is neat, but it's not something I use very often because it makes so many mistakes and I can't trust it. And the last thing I want to do is babysit a computer program. That is my attitude, by the way. Number three, AI? You mean that technology built on the theft of humanity's intellectual capital that's creating an environmental disaster and allowing plutocrats to steal jobs? That third attitude isn't unreasonable, by the way, but said in a public space, it's the sort of thing that tends to make you seem like you're also looking at pocket calculators suspiciously for fear that they're going to put math teachers out of work. So, look, technology is a tool. Tools are meant to help us. Some tools are really useless. Others are so useful that they can help us to cut a lot of steps out of the work that used to be really labor intensive. So, for example, 3D printers and CNC routers allow people to be able to make things a lot faster and with a higher degree of precision than they could have ever done by hand. There are also tools, though, like hammers and chisels that have been around for millennia, and yet we still use them today because they're still useful for a lot of tasks. So, we have to think about AI as a potential tool to help us to be better at what we want to do, not as a replacement for every tool in our toolbox. And as Mike Allton discussed in his AMA St. Louis annual conference presentation, part of the problem is that most of us haven't yet learned how this tool actually works, and thus we're not able to use it properly. But he argued that if we do learn how to use it, we can build a customized electronic brain to help out our businesses and sharpen our decision making. So let's see what Mike had to say as I recap his talk, and I'll share some of my own ideas as well. I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this is the Marketing Gateway. So before I get into Mike's talk, let me offer an analogy that'll be a useful framework for us. Microsoft Excel. When I was in my 20s, Excel absolutely mystified me, and I couldn't even begin to understand how it worked because no one had ever explained a spreadsheet or a database to me before. Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, I had those mastered, but ask me how to create even the simplest formula in Excel, I would spend more time complaining about how hard Excel was to use than it would have taken me to just learn how to do the task. And Excel is hard to use, at least at first, because it's really prone to throw up error messages that don't really make any sense. And look, as a kid, I was pretty skilled at using command line DOS and writing things in BASIC and opening up hex editors to adjust the values in my computer games. And as I got older, I got even better at using a computer and I could do even more with one. It wasn't my technology skills that kept me from being able to use Excel. It was that no one had taken the time to show me how the program actually worked and why it can be so useful. So when I went to business school and finally had to learn how to use Excel as a tool for creating spreadsheets and reports, I actually loved it. Excel is a tremendously useful program when you understand what it's actually meant to do. It still is frustrating and difficult at times, sure, but it's also really powerful if you use it right. And I'm going to argue that the same is true with large language model AI tools that utilize a chatbot style interface. And we're just going to call that AI for short in the remainder of this episode. You know the platforms: Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and dozens more just like them. They're no longer new or novel, and as we find use cases for them, they can do some helpful and interesting things, provided we're willing to learn how to use them. So, Mike Allton's epiphany about how to do all that came when he was on a road trip between St. Louis and California, and he began conversing with a chatbot to try to figure out how this technology could be useful for business decision making. He realized during the course of this conversation that many of the reasons that people take a neutral or negative viewpoint towards this technology is because they don't really understand how it works or how to correct its tendencies towards giving them output that isn't correct or useful. And he decided to start a consulting business providing the training to fix this problem on the human end of things. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the nuts and bolts of this discussion because it made more sense in a 30-minute presentation than it might in a 15-minute podcast episode. But one of the things Mike talked about is the tendency of people to treat a chatbot as an advisor you go to for occasional needs rather than as an assistant that's working with you on a project. To use a different analogy, it's like going to a coworker whenever you need help on something you don't understand, instead of bringing them into your process and allowing them to help you with every step. The problem with large language model AI, though, is that it's built on a foundation of information known as training data, and then it's further informed by instructions provided by the platform owner to tell it how to respond to user prompts. Each AI program has its own tone and approach towards output because of these instructions. But if you want the AI program to produce output that goes beyond the basics, you need to understand how AI platforms' memory works. See, each platform has a memory that's measured in what are called tokens. And that means that the AI platform can only remember so far back into a conversation before it runs out of tokens, and then can't reference its older output anymore. All it can reference is what it has in memory or what it has in its training data or instructions. So if you have a very long conversation with ChatGPT, it will start forgetting what it said in the beginning of the conversation and either begin repeating itself or coming up with new suggestions that don't match its original output. Likewise, if you attempt to overload the chatbot with a bunch of knowledge using your initial prompt and then have a lengthy conversation with it, the chatbot will eventually stop responding to the initial prompt and simply start basing the conversation off what it's been saying instead. Kind of like reading a long ticker tape, but losing the end every now and then. So, Mike Allton provided a list of all the different kinds of memory a chatbot uses. The first is chat memory, which is what I've been describing up to this point, the chat itself measured in tokens. The second is system memory, which is the training data and platform level programming. The third is custom instructions, which come either from the platform or from the custom instructions set by the user before a prompt begins. The fourth is deep research, which compiles reference materials, examines them thoroughly, and then integrates them into a report you can further interact with. And then the fifth is retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which is a function that allows chatbots to integrate external sources into their responses, essentially allowing them to search the internet or to look at source documents to reduce training data hallucinations. Now, many users really stick to the first two types of memory, and thus they're unable to really see the power that an AI assistant has at its disposal with custom instructions, deep research, and RAG. So for example, Mike recommended using custom instructions to provide your AI assistant with an understanding of who you are, what your business is, and what your objectives are, so that it's able to respond more specifically and not generally when you give it a prompt. And you can also use these custom instructions to create a personality for the AI assistant. Mike said that he has named his Clue, which is a reference to the AI program that becomes the bad guy in the movie Tron Legacy. Hopefully his doesn't go evil on him. And has given it the role of his AI chief of staff so that it conducts itself in that persona. With an AI assistant more knowledgeable about your business, you can generate better output. But Mike pointed out that because of the limitations of chat memory, you sometimes have to remind the AI assistant what you've been talking about to keep the main scope of your discussion from veering off course. The practical tip he offered is to occasionally ask the chatbot to summarize what's been covered up to this point. This allows the chatbot to reference the summary in a more efficient way than to have to read the evolving discussion, and it also ensures the most salient points don't get lost in the discussion. Beyond that, Mike recommended using something he calls the price framework. Now, I don't know if this is proprietary to him or comes from another source. I didn't find it in common use when I searched online, but it is useful. It boils down to 5 components that make a good prompt for opening up a discussion with a chatbot. And they are persona, resources, instructions, constraints, and examples. So persona instructs the chatbot on how to respond to you. Even if you've already set a general persona, you can ask the AI chatbot to role play. You are the CMO of a Fortune 500 company, you can say, or you are a consumer in the target market for this product, or you are the Incredible Hulk and confused about my brand, or anything else that you'd like the chatbot to be. Resources are the information you provide to the chatbot as reference materials. These can be text-based, but many chatbots are becoming multimodal and can also review raw data output images, charts, graphics, web links, sound, or even video. Generally, the more specific these resources are to your prompt, the better. Most tools allow you to attach files as resources. Instructions are what you want the actual chatbot to do, and these need to be crafted as specifically as possible to give you maximum control over the output. Remember that chatbots tend towards broad styles and terse output, so you can tell them to give you output that's different from the norm or which has more depth and detail. Just remember that chatbots sometimes take instructions quite literally, so be precise with your words and avoid idioms or figurative language whenever possible. Constraints are your guardrails for how you want that output to come out. I personally have found it's very useful to require a chatbot to both cite its sources and also to check them to ensure that they're valid if I'm using a deep research tool or a RAG-enabled tool. There's nothing like manufactured quotes or sources that are completely make-believe to make you feel like the output is entirely worthless. But telling the chatbot to limit itself and produce output that is genuine does help to limit hallucinations, though you still should check over the output to make sure that they aren't present. Finally, examples are useful if you want the output to come out in a certain way, or if you have a particular style or format you want the chatbot to stick to. This is very useful for proposals, form letters, and other boilerplate style output. Just remember that you always should check over the output to ensure it doesn't simply just look like the example, but actually is factually and substantially correct. Far too many official documents have already been revealed as being written by AI due to obvious issues, and examples can only go so far towards keeping the chatbot from hallucinating. Mike's ultimate point was that if you can learn to use AI as a backup brain that supports your business and helps you to make decisions, you can use it as a force multiplier for a lot of tasks. This is more or less what those daily users of AI platforms tend to articulate to me, and while I am myself an optimistic skeptic of the technology, I think there's some merit to the idea of using the AI technology to boost your productivity and to help you through the day, much like using Excel. And Mike Allton does something that I think is a must for any AI user, and that is credit his platform for its output when he uses it. He's not afraid to admit that Clue authors articles or documents for him, and he's even proud of what he's able to do with the help of his AI assistant. Then that's exactly what I recommend. Always disclose when you utilize AI for any purpose, especially since it may make mistakes, and you'll be better off if you acknowledge that from the start. Well, I hope you found this recap useful. And as with all of my podcast scripts, it was 100% human generated, for better or worse. I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this has been the Marketing Gateway. See you next time. This month, it's National Donate Life Month, and so I want to encourage you to consider registering to be an organ donor. Did you know that one organ donor can not only save up to 8 lives, but can also donate corneas that can help people with their vision and tissue that can be made into hundreds of incredibly beneficial medical products? Your gift of life can go really far in benefiting others, potentially 75 lives or more. And you might be surprised who can be a donor and what can be donated. Even people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s can be donors today. When you register to be a donor, all you're doing is saying, if I die, I want my organs and tissues to go to the people who need them. You can be confident that the doctors and nurses who are taking care of you will do everything they can to keep you alive, and it's up to them, not the people recovering the organs, to decide when you've reached a point where you cannot come back. Every now and then there's a sensational news story about a situation where the hospital got it wrong, but those cases are rare. And that's why there are so many precautions in place to ensure that donation is administered with safety, respect, transparency, and a high degree of ethical behavior. Donors are heroes and they're treated with dignity. And there's an important reason why you need to consider this. There are over 100,000 people on the National Transplant Registry right now who will die if they don't receive an organ. Many of them need a kidney transplant and have to go and do dialysis treatments daily just to stay alive. Dialysis is time-consuming and not a lot of fun, and those individuals have trouble leading healthy, happy, productive lives because they're really, really sick. 13 people die every day waiting for an organ transplant. So imagine there's a mom out there who needs a second chance to take care of her kids, or a new grandfather who wants to see his grandkids grow up, or a child who wants to have a chance at leading a full life, or a newlywed who hasn't had a chance to settle down and start a family yet. All of these sorts of people, and more just like them, are on the waiting list now, and they need your help. I personally know many of the hardworking professionals who get those donated gifts to the people in need. And let me tell you, I'm always amazed by their passion, their professionalism, and their dedication to caring for donors and their families. So please visit donatelife.net and click on register to be a donor. If you're willing to read up on the resources to learn more, feel free. And if you're not ready to register but still want to be a donor, please tell your family and friends so that if they have to make the decision for you, they will know your wishes. And you won't be alone. 90% of Americans support organ donation.